Karen Whitfield stood waist-deep in chlorinated water, her designer blazer floating around her like a deflated life raft, clutching her soggy clipboard with white knuckles. The silver Audi A6 behind her sat perfectly parked in the middle of the Henderson's kidney-shaped pool, its hazard lights blinking frantically underwater like a mechanical cry for help. The car alarm had finally stopped wailing, replaced by the much more terrifying sound of silence, and the Henderson family staring at her from their patio door. "Ma'am?" Officer Rodriguez called from the pool deck, his notepad miraculously dry despite the chaos. "Can you explain how your vehicle ended up in a swimming pool?" Karen's left eye twitched, the same tic that appeared whenever someone questioned her authority as Sunset Meadows' hail oil president. She had been president for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that she was counting. Much. "This is clearly a property line dispute," Karen announced, water sloshing around her as she gestured wildly with her clipboard. According to Section 4.27 of the Sunset Meadows Community Guidelines, no recreational water features can extend beyond the established setback requirements. This pool is in violation, and I was simply conducting an inspection. By driving into it, 10-year-old Tommy Henderson piped up from behind his parents, earning him a sharp elbow from his mother. The inspection required precise measurements, Karen continued, ignoring the growing crowd of neighbors gathering like vultures at a roadside accident. "My vehicle is exactly 15.7 feet long. Now we know definitively that this pool extends 15.7 feet into what should be public space." Mrs. Henderson finally found her voice. "Karen, you drove through our fence." Karen turned, her sensible pumps squelching against the pool bottom. Sure enough, a Karen-shaped hole gaped in the Hendersons' privacy fence, complete with tire tracks leading from the street like a roadmap of poor decisions. Splinters of cedar floated on the pool's surface like wooden confetti celebrating her spectacular miscalculation. That fence was also in violation, Karen declared, though her voice had lost some of its earlier conviction. 7 feet, 2 inches. The maximum allowed height is 7 feet even. It's been there for 12 years. Mr. Henderson sputtered. Grandfather clauses don't apply to flagrant safety violations. Karen shot back, though she was beginning to realize that her own flagrant safety violation might be the bigger issue here. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I need to see your license and registration." Karen's hand moved instinctively toward her purse, only to remember it was currently fish food somewhere in the deep end. Through the distorted water, she could see her emergency whistle, the one she used to break up unauthorized neighborhood gatherings, glinting mockingly from the pool drain. "This is harassment," she announced, though the word came out slightly garbled as she accidentally inhaled chlorinated water. "I am conducting official HOA business. I have every right to inspect common areas." "This isn't a common area," Mrs. Henderson said. "It's our backyard." "According to my calculations," Karen began, then stopped. Her calculations had been based on the original 1987 subdivision plat, which she'd photocopied so many times that half the property lines were illegible. She'd been so certain that the Hendersons had encroached on the community easement, so certain that she'd driven her car directly through their fence to prove her point. The crowd was growing. Karen could see Martha Kowalski from 412 Maple Street recording everything on her phone, probably already composing her next-door post about HOA overreach. Behind Martha, the Pattles were shaking their heads in that disappointed way that made Karen's stomach clench. Even worse, she spotted Brad Morrison, the same Brad Morrison who'd been angling to run against her in next month's HOA elections, pushing through the crowd with an expression of barely contained glee. "Karen," Brad called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "As vice president, I feel obligated to ask, did you get approval from the board before conducting this inspection?" Karen's grip tightened on her soggy clipboard. The emergency board meeting she'd called for tonight was supposed to address the Henderson pool situation. She planned to present her evidence, demand immediate compliance, and bask in another victory for community standards. Instead, she was standing in the very pool she'd planned to declare illegal, her dignity sinking faster than her car. Karen felt the words like a physical blow. My leadership has increased property values by 12% over 3 years. Your leadership has turned us into a laughingstock, Brad replied. Do you realize that reporters are calling us the pool car community? That our neighborhood is being featured on late-night comedy shows? Temporary embarrassment in service of long-term community excellence, Karen said, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Temporary. Martha held up her phone again. The video has 200,000 views now, and someone set it to music. Karen couldn't help herself. She looked. On Martha's screen, her silver Audi plunged into the Henderson pool in slow motion while My Heart Will Go On swelled dramatically in the background. The comments were not kind. This isn't about the video, Karen said desperately. This is about maintaining the standards that make Sunset Meadows special. Without proper enforcement, we become just another declining suburban neighborhood where anything goes. Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, and the room went silent again. Karen stared at her. What? Maybe a neighborhood where anything goes wouldn't be such a bad thing, Mrs. Henderson repeated, louder this time. Maybe a place where people can park their motorcycles on the street and paint their doors whatever color they want and put out Christmas lights after Thanksgiving instead of waiting until December 1st. Maybe that place would actually feel like home instead of a museum. The words hit Karen like a splash of cold pool water. She looked around the room, seeing her neighbors, really seeing them, for the first time in years. Martha Kowalski, who'd been cited 6 times for leaving her trash cans out past pickup time. The Patels, whose garden gnomes had been their grandmother's wedding gift. Tommy Henderson, who wasn't allowed to skateboard on the sidewalks because of noise complaints. Karen started, then stopped. For 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, she'd been so focused on maintaining standards that she'd forgotten why those standards existed in the first place. They were supposed to make the community better, not turn it into a battleground. I think, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, that maybe I've lost sight of what's important. Brad Morrison looked stunned. Are you stepping down? Karen looked down at her backup clipboard, with its color-coded violation reports and meticulously documented infractions. Then she looked back up at the room full of neighbors she'd spent 3 years regulating instead of getting to know. I'm calling for a community vote, she announced, on my leadership on the current enforcement policies and on what kind of neighborhood we want Sunset Meadows to be. The room buzzed with surprised conversation. Patricia Vance leaned over. Karen, are you sure about this? Karen thought about her car at the bottom of the pool, about the fence she'd destroyed, about the viral video that would follow her forever. Then she thought about the Municipal Excellence Award gathering dust on her shelf, and how empty her house felt when she came home from HOA meetings, where half the residents avoided eye contact with her. I'm sure, she said. But I want everyone to understand something first. Everything I did because I loved this community. I wanted us to be the best neighborhood in the city. I wanted our property values to stay strong, our streets to stay safe, our community to stay beautiful. She paused, looking directly at the Hendersons. I just forgot that the most important thing about any community isn't the rules, it's the people. The vote was scheduled for the following Saturday. As residents filed out of the community center, many of them stopped to shake Karen's hand or offer quiet words of support. Even Mr. Henderson paused at her table. For what it's worth, he said, the pool needed cleaning anyway. Karen managed a small smile. I'll pay for the repairs, of course. The fence too. I know you will, he said. You're many things, Karen, but you're not irresponsible. As the room emptied, Karen sat alone at the long table, staring at her backup clipboard. Tomorrow, she'd start the insurance claims. She'd deal with the reporters and the viral video and the late-night comedy shows. She'd figure out how to rebuild her life after being #PoolKaren. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, 2 months and 16 days, she wasn't worried about community standards or violation reports or municipal excellence awards. She was thinking about her neighbors and wondering if it was too late to learn their first names. I don't need board approval for routine inspections, she said, though they all knew routine inspections didn't typically involve vehicular assault on neighborhood pools. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I'm going to need you to step out of the pool so we can sort this out properly." Karen looked toward the shallow end, where the pool steps disappeared under 3 feet of water. Then she looked at the deep end, where her car had settled like a metallic island. Then she looked at the crowd of neighbors, all of whom were definitely going to vote for Brad Morrison now. "I'll need assistance," she said quietly. Mr. Henderson, displaying the kind of grace that Karen had never shown him during their 3-year fence height dispute, waded into the pool and offered her his arm. As she sloshed toward the steps, her waterlogged blazer trailing behind her like a defeated flag, Karen's mind was already working. This wasn't over. This couldn't be over. Because if Karen Wickfield had learned anything in her 53 years, it was that every problem had a solution. You just had to be willing to think outside the box, or in this case, outside the pool. The tow truck arrived 20 minutes later, and Karen watched in grim satisfaction as her Audi was winched from the depths like a silver submarine returning to the surface. The car was totaled, obviously. The fence would need replacing. The pool would need cleaning. But as she stood there dripping on the Hendersons' perfectly manicured lawn, Karen felt a familiar fire igniting in her chest. She'd been HOA president for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. She'd handled noise complaints, parking violations, and the Great Garden Gnome controversy of 2024. She wasn't about to let one tiny miscalculation destroy everything she'd built. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, wringing out her blazer with as much dignity as she could muster, "you'll be receiving a citation for the fence violation by end of business tomorrow." Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. "Are you serious? After what just happened?" "HOA regulations don't stop applying because of personal inconvenience," Karen replied, though her voice cracked slightly on the word inconvenience. "The fence is still 2 inches over height restrictions." Brad Morrison laughed, actually laughed, and Karen felt her jaw clench so hard she worried about her dental work. "This should make for an interesting board meeting tonight," he said, pulling out his own phone to record the aftermath. "I'm sure the community will be very interested to hear how their HOA fees are being used." Karen straightened her shoulders, water still dripping from her hair onto her shoes. 7 o'clock sharp, she said. "Community center, all residents welcome." As she squelched away toward her own house 3 doors down, Karen could hear the whispers starting behind her. By tonight, everyone in Sunset Meadows would know that their HOA president had driven her car into a neighbor's pool. By tomorrow, the story would probably make the local news. But Karen had survived worse scandals. There was the time she'd had the Johnson's vegetable garden declared a visual nuisance because the tomatoes grew too tall. The incident with the unauthorized 4th of July decorations that she'd personally removed under cover of darkness. The ongoing battle with the teenager who kept parking his motorcycle on the street instead of in his driveway. She'd weathered them all because she understood something her neighbors didn't. Someone had to maintain standards. Someone had to ensure that property values didn't plummet because of slack enforcement and community apathy. Someone had to be willing to make the hard decisions, even if those decisions occasionally involved automotive submersion. As Karen reached her front door, she caught sight of her reflection in the glass, bedraggled, dripping, and somehow still clutching her soggy clipboard. For just a moment, she wondered if maybe she'd gone too far this time. Then she remembered the 2-inch fence violation and felt her resolve harden like concrete. The board meeting was going to be very interesting indeed. The Sunset Meadows Community Center had never hosted a crowd like this. By 6:45 p.m., every folding chair was occupied, with residents lined along the walls like protesters at a town hall. Karen surveyed the packed room from behind the long table at the front, her emergency backup blazer pressed and professional, her hair styled to disguise the lingering smell of chlorine that no amount of shampoo had been able to eliminate. To her left sat Brad Morrison, practically vibrating with anticipation. To her right, Treasurer Patricia Vance kept shooting her concerned looks while Secretary Janet Liu typed frantically on her laptop, probably updating her resignation letter in real time. "Before we begin tonight's proceedings," Karen announced, gaveling the meeting to order with her backup gavel, Her primary gavel was still somewhere at the bottom of the Henderson pool. I want to address the elephant in the room. You mean the car in the pool? Someone called from the back, earning nervous laughter from the crowd. Karen's eye twitched. I mean the ongoing pattern of regulatory violations that threaten the very foundation of our community standards. The laughter died. Martha Kowalski raised her hand. Karen, did you really drive your car through the Hendersons' fence on purpose? I conducted a necessary inspection of a suspected boundary encroachment, Karen replied smoothly. The methods were unorthodox, but the violations I discovered were very real. Mr. Henderson shot to his feet. The fence has been there for 12 years. You approved the construction permit yourself. Karen flipped through her backup folder. Her primary folder was also fish food, until she found the copy she needed. That approval was issued under the previous administration. I've since discovered discrepancies in the measurement documentation. So you decided to ram your car through it? Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked with disbelief. I decided to take definitive action to protect our community's property values. Karen corrected. Did you know that improperly maintained boundaries can reduce neighborhood home values by up to 15%? Brad Morrison leaned toward his microphone. Did you know that HOA presidents who drive cars into pools can reduce neighborhood home values by 100% when the story goes viral? The room erupted in murmurs. Karen felt heat rising up her neck. What story? Martha Kowalski held up her phone. Channel 7 wants to interview you tomorrow morning. And the Ring doorbell footage is already trending on TikTok. #PoolKaren has over 50,000 views. Karen's carefully maintained composure cracked like ice on a frozen pond. She'd spent 3 years building Sunset Meadows into the most well-regulated community in the county. Their violation rate was the lowest in the city. Their property values had increased steadily under her leadership. She'd won the Municipal Excellence Award 2 years running. And now she was #PoolKaren. The real issue here, she said, gripping the table's edge, isn't my inspection methods. It's the systematic erosion of community standards that led to this situation in the first place. Karen, Patricia Vance said gently, maybe we should discuss your inspection methods. My methods are thorough and effective, Karen snapped. When the Patels installed their garden gnomes without approval, what happened? I personally removed them and issued appropriate citations. Result: compliance. You stole our garden gnomes in the middle of the night? Mr. Patel called out. I confiscated non-compliant decorative items during authorized enforcement hours. Karen corrected. It was 3 a.m. Authorization doesn't observe traditional business hours when community standards are at stake. The room was getting louder, residents talking over each other in a chaos of complaints and accusations. Karen banged her backup gavel, but the sound was too thin to cut through the noise. This wasn't how board meetings were supposed to go. There should be order, process, respect for proper procedure. Brad Morrison stood up, and something about his movement made the room fall silent. I think, he said, his voice carrying easily through the sudden quiet, that we need to seriously consider whether Karen's leadership style is in the community's best interest.